introduce my panellists and then talk about the theme for this session, which we've already alluded to. But firstly, next to me, we have Rachel Swift, Head of Marketing for John Lewis. Then we have Dan Izbicki next to her, Global Director of Creative Excellence. Great job title at Unilever. And then Charlotte at the end, Head of Creative Agency Relationships at Google, who may well talk to us more about YouTube as the debate goes on. Could I just put the synopsis of our theme back up on the big screen, if possible? You've still got that at the back. This is a challenge for the IT guys. Or I can read it out to you. You've all got it in front of you, anyway, haven't you? Shall I read it out? So, this is where we started thinking about the discussion we were going to have. In a world of marketing science, algorithms and rationality, many marketeers feel embarrassed to mention the C word, creativity. We all know that as humans, emotional engagement is still the greatest motivator of all, or do we? After the last session. We invite a panel of practitioners and experts to talk about their understanding of creativity as an effectiveness driver. And what's brilliant is that we've got 3 organisations that I look at from the outside and look like they are organisations who have put creativity at their heart, but look like they might still have fun doing it, which was quite useful based on the fact that Tom maybe alluded to the fact that fun was going to go out of fashion for us. And I think what's going to be interesting in this conversation, and the panellists didn't hear the last session, but some of the words that were used, we've got automated actions, programmatic marketing, analytics, big data. We could be forgiven for thinking that all of our jobs could be done by robots, apart from the step-aside functions, again, that Tom alluded to. But we think there may be a different role for creativity that we need to champion a bit more in a different way. So what does the kind of role of data mean for creativity? What is at the heart of the most successful organisations, and how do we square this circle between data analytics and creativity? That's what we're going to discuss. So if I ask the first question to the panellists, if that's all right, I think what we'd be interested in hearing from you is whether your organisation has a particular philosophy or approach to creativity as a driver of effectiveness, and whether you think that approach has changed over time in the light of all the new learnings that we've been hearing about today. Shall I go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a really interesting time to have this conversation because we, as John Lewis, are about to launch arguably one of the most kind of creative campaigns or marketing communications vehicles of the year. So it's a really interesting time, and and so it's a great time to talk about it. And I actually, and it's testament. I'm really busy at the moment, as you can imagine. So it's testament to how passionate I feel about creativity that I wanted to be here today to talk about it. And it really is at the heart of certainly our communications part of our business is creativity, and actually throughout the rest of the organisation. I mean, we've put a slightly different lens around it. We might call it innovation, if you like, but I think as a business, John Lewis, even though it's 150 years old, 153 now, it's actually, we've always been really progressive and actually really innovative and really creative in everything that we do. And so I think even just as an organisation, we are very, very innovative. But I think as far as marketing communications is concerned, that creativity has never been more important. I think there was a recent IPA paper about it, or a recent study about it, which said that actually, brand fame, brand building, creativity, emotion, all the things that connect with customers are crucial for commercial success. So it's something that we take very, very seriously.
Great. I should say that we did ask Rachel to trail the Christmas ad for us today, but she said no. You have to wait till next week. Dan, can you talk a bit about Unilever?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it'll come as no surprise with my job title that I'm obviously passionate about creativity, and I think that is reflected in the fact that that we have this particular role within Unilever. I mean, I think. I didn't see the talk earlier, but I think for me that we have to recognise essentially there's always been 2 types of advertising. There has been demand creation advertising and demand fulfilment. The big glossy BMW ad and the sort of ads in the back of Auto Trader. And I think so much of the confusion that surrounds our industry is because of the mixing up of those 2 types of communication. And recognising, that in the former you're talking to people in the market, and in the latter you're talking to people it's out of the market, and it's actually that out of the market communication which is incredibly important and where creativity is really, really powerful, because as we now know from from the likes of Ehrenberg Bass, from the likes of the IPA, we are talking to, it's all about building brand memorability. And the bit that people often forget is that it's about talking to infrequent buyers who, are just not that into our brands and are largely disinterested in our brands, don't even know much about our brands. So that is why creativity is even more important, so important. And in a world, as Rachel alluded to, where there's so much choice, I think that is why creativity is so powerful.
Very useful distinction, just to remind us of in-market versus out-of-market. Otherwise, the danger is we all rush to...
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Same question?
Yeah, so I guess I'm talking from a slightly different perspective in the sense of talking through the lens of a creative platform for brands to communicate on and for creators as well, which is YouTube. And the underpinning principle for us, I suppose, is that there's a very, very simple equation, which is a billion users a month and no commissioning editor. And actually the impact that has on the creative environment is huge. You've got no one saying that's in, that's out, that's cool, that's not. There are no schedules. So it really creates this incredible kind of seething mass of creativity. And actually a really important word for us is diversity as well. So a lot of diversity of thought, a lot of diversity of taste. You've got different audiences, different tribes, different content themes, genres, all rubbing up against each other. And actually that's what makes it, for us anyway, such a hugely exciting platform. The second principle for us, which is really important, being I guess we're a user-first company. Google's known for, put the user first and all else will follow. And that applies very much to YouTube as well. So it's a choice-based platform. So I think about 1 in 5 video views on YouTube is instigated by a search. So you've immediately got a mindset of a viewer who is very lean in, who is very, very active. And actually, as a brand, if you can, creativity basically is richly rewarded on the platform if you can be chosen. And that's the kind of the killer challenge for brands and creative people and creative agencies, is to how you get chosen in that environment. But if you are chosen, we've got all the research that says, all the impacts on, the amount of time people spend with your brand, the uplift in kind of brand metrics, you will be richly rewarded.
It's using the platform in the right way that's appropriate for your brand, though, isn't it? So I think that's something we always do when we're talking about sort of digital channels. And in John Lewis, it's about enhancing the sort of storytelling of our campaigns and about enhancing and being more immersive in terms of, the campaigns that we're trying to communicate. And so it's making sure you use the channels in the right way and just not for the sake of it. The problem is, you get so many billions of people viewing, it'll just get lost. So you just need to make sure that you're using it in the right way and the right way for your brand as well.
Absolutely. And immersion is actually another word that we talk about a lot. Choice plus immersion. Get chosen, and then you have the opportunity to go really deep.
Well, it leads me to think, is creativity defined differently by channel, do you think? Or is
I think not necessarily. I think you need to be creative in every channel or every touch point that you're... there are more sort of, I suppose, more digital conversion tactics that you use where you probably need creativity less and less. But we're really conscious at John Lewis that we need to be inspirational and creative at every customer touch point that we have, whether that's whether that's on a website, which is much more functional but hopefully inspirational at the same time, or whether that's actually in our shop windows, or whether that's whether you go into the digital environment in our in-store environment, etc. So I don't think there's necessarily a definition. But
and Dan, I wondered, we all use the word creativity. Does your organisation have a particular definition of it? You alluded to Ehrenberg Bass and fame and emotion.
Do we? I'm not sure we have a particular definition of creativity. I think, obviously within Unilever there are sort of nuances. Maybe obviously we are very much driven by the USLP, the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, and every brand has to contribute towards that with a clear brand purpose, and build towards a contribution towards that plan, and build towards our long-term ambition, which is about making sustainable living commonplace. Having said that, I don't think that necessarily, it doesn't mean that we can play somehow by different rules. You know, it still means for us, at least, that brand purpose becomes a way of making our brands more memorable and more salient. Clearly, we're also operating in a world where you've got different consumer needs and different consumer demands, and those are changing. So it's not that we're very aware of that. But I fundamentally think that the communication, just because we have purpose-driven brands, doesn't mean that you can't. You're suddenly playing by a different set of rules.
Yeah, understand. And any additions? Do you define creativity in a particular way?
I don't think we would say we had a definition of it per se when you're looking at it, because it's for YouTube, it's a platform, and it's actually a platform for other people's creativity to flourish in a sense. So everybody brings their own definition, I think, to the platform, and then you know the driving factor of that is then fame, and the fact if you've got great ideas, they can catch fire very, very quickly and spread very quickly.
Yeah, we just talk about being quite restless internally about, you know, just constantly trying to innovate and constantly trying to surprise and delight customers through our marketing communications, and so we talk about being sort of constantly restless. I suppose that could be a definition of creativity in a way, or how you behave.
It's interesting that it's relatively subjective when a lot of the conversations we've had this morning have been much more prove and test, and this element of creativity is still something that people find it hard to define or articulate.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever get away from that. You know, despite what the previous panelists might have said, I still think that marketing will always involve a sort of variety, a broader skill set, which is clearly that sort of analytical side, but it also requires that, you know, that sense of your gut and being able to judge things based on the information that you have, and you're never going to have the perfect amount of information and perfect set of data.
Where does analytics and data sit within your organisations now? Has it been brought into marketing? How does it work? Do you have teams? Is it separate? Could you talk a bit about your organisational structures for us?
Yeah, so we have, we've recently restructured our marketing team and our customer team now, as they're called, so that actually all online, because we have got obviously online analytics as well as kind of customer analytics as well. So actually all of the online analytics and all of the sort of brand research and everything sits within marketing communications. But we also have what we call a sort of customer information, which is shared by Waitrose and John Lewis. So it's a whole wealth of data that which we can pull upon, which sits separately. But all of the sort of data about customers really sits within marketing. Yeah.
Yeah, we now, so it tends to sit within our insight team, CMI. On each of our floors, we now have what are called people data centers. So they are a resource for our brand teams to go to and to gather information, right there and then. And we have a CRM team, or PRM as we call it, people rather than consumer. So yeah, it's increasingly becoming part of the day-to-day.
Great.
Well, I guess it probably won't surprise you. My answer is probably going to be, I mean, data and kind of insight and data-driven decision-making is Google and YouTube's DNA. You know, we're a first and foremost, an engineering company, so it's what the company's built on. So there's no special department or anything like that. And I guess what's interesting in the way that we as an organisation work with, so actually, we work very closely with the likes of John Lewis and Unilever, is what can we provide to enrich other brands' kind of decision making as well. And I mean, there's some pieces up here I can show in a bit, which are, we're quite experimental as well. We're constantly, kind of launching new ways to measure things. So actually, we spend a lot of our time just bringing that stuff to market, taking that stuff to brands and saying, and that is not to replace creativity or put any kind of constraints on it, but just to say, actually, do you realise this against this is performing in that way, users are responding in this way, and hopefully that's useful decision-making stimulus.
Yes. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, if you go to the slide which says unskippable on it, hopefully, maybe, don't skip it. I knew we should have had the clickers ourselves.
Maybe they'll be able to do it.
Looking a bit frantic.
Oh, there you go. So, I mean, this is GIFified, you'll be glad to know, so I'm not going to make you sit through, no offence any L'Oreal ads, but we have this, it's an initiative called Unskippable. So it's, we call them unskippable experiments. And we do this with brands all over the world, actually. And it's actually just taking different treatments of pieces of content. And you can see there on the far, well, on my left, your right, that could be wrong. You have something that is a very, highly produced, beautifully crafted kind of brand ad, through to, in the middle, you've kind of got a blogger tutorial, through to on the other side, actually, I mean, you could term it UGC, so a regular viewer creating their own content around this new product. And what we can do is using brand lift surveys, which is our product built into YouTube. So every time you run advertising on YouTube, you can get these results back. It's just actually just look against different demographics, how this stuff is kind of performing. But I think, it's guidance, and I think we really kind of we talk about it as such. And so actually I think what we found with the Glam, which was the very highly produced one, is in terms of view through rate, so really that's an indicator of how long are people sticking with it. It was the most successful. But actually when it came through to ad recall for younger demographics, and this was actually looking at demographics, it was like, what do younger consumers kind of respond to? It was the tell, which is obviously this much more direct, a bit more lo-fi execution. So this is the stuff that we're kind of doing on a day-to-day basis to try and, help marketers just make decisions and understand what's working on our platform.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it, to work out, because there's so many myths around what kind of creativity works well where. Yeah. In a way, the Glam goes counter to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's, there's all sorts of, there's a lot of debate, especially around online video, which is our world. YouTube loves craft. It loves beautiful, beautiful John Lewis ads. But there is also a community there who have grown up with a very, very different style of communication. And we are seeing some brands have some success with really, really playing to that, and, acting a bit more contextually in that environment. So, test and learn is a classic kind of Google mantra.
It doesn't really surprise me, the results that you've just described, because you'd imagine that the tell is YouTube's heartland, isn't it? It's about going to an environment where you can learn and understand, and that's what you'd expect. Yeah. But it's interesting to know that the brand ad also performed well. But it's just about the right content for the right environment. It's just that, I think we put in our IPA paper that we submitted with, about just make ads that make content that people want to watch, talk about, and share, and then it's not rocket science.
Which sounds, I was going to say, it sounds like such great common sense, doesn't it? But so often we maybe forget that when we.
They do, they do, they do, absolutely.
While we're on the subject of measurement, is there anything that you wanted to add from a Unilever perspective of how do you put in place measurement to test creativity, the effectiveness of creativity?
I mean, obviously we have lots of measurements. I think that we use all of the traditional measurements out there. We do a lot of qualitative research. We obviously do pre-testing. My view is that I sort of feel the research industry as a whole is slightly letting us down in this area.
Anyone here from any of the big market research agencies?
Great.
Chair.
Yeah, only one.
It'd be only the chair of the Market Research Society. I think it would be a good challenge to say, given all the new learnings that we now have on how communications works and that emotion beats rational, all the learnings that we've got, have we got the right measurements in place to make sure we are measuring the things that we know matter?
Yeah.
We put that as a challenge.
I think. Rachel was there's this paper that's just come out from the IPA about how we're increasingly becoming short-termist, and I think that is driven by all sorts of factors. I think it's driven, it's clearly driven by our own behaviours. I think it's driven by our measurement systems. I think it's also driven by our awards and the way that we award work, and increasingly that is going towards work that is over the short term and kind of stunt-like. And all the evidence shows, I mean, that paper talks about the power of creativity is as a multiplier once you have, over the long term, and once you have, a good, effective share of voice. So it's not a replacement for. It's not a replacement for money, ultimately.
One of the themes that seems to come out of this conference is the seminal papers that Peter and Les have written on behalf of the IPA need to be reread and shared and recommunicated to people, because the lessons that they've given us and the learning that we have based on their analysis is so important to keep reminding, I think, all of the client companies. And it'd be interesting to talk just for a minute, again, if we are becoming more short-termism in the way that we plan, develop, and then measure communications, what can we as a group of people do to sort of remind people that there's a different story in town? How do you do it? Because John Lewis doesn't look like that. It looks like it does the opposite.
Yeah, well, we do. I mean, we're a partnership, so we're co-owned. So it's crucially important that we kind of measure every pound that we spend on, because we'll be completely scrutinised for that. So, so it is really important that we measure. But our TV campaigns at Christmas are our most profitable in terms of ROI. So it does demonstrate that actually you invest in creativity and you invest in creating memorable brand building campaigns that build the brand over the long term, as well as create short-term commercial success for the business. But at the same time, they're building the brand over the long term. And as they say, they're almost profitable in terms of ROI. So we don't just do it for the sake of it. We do it because it actually gives a return to the partnership and makes it more profitable. So.
And how do you do it? How do you make sure that when you've got a purpose for your brand, people stay true to it and commit to it for the long term, when there must be a lot of change in the organisation?
Well, I mean, it's hard. I think that comes down to strong leadership, ultimately from the top. It's not much more complicated than that. I think there is always inevitably within Unilever that everybody tends to change roles. Within every 3 to 4 years. And we all want to make our mark when you arrive on a brand, but when you look at the likes of our most successful brands, like Persil, or we call it Dig internally, Dirt is Good, or Dove, they've had change, but they have stayed true to that original purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's leadership.
Yeah, it is. And to say, retail's a hugely volatile kind of environment at the moment, and we're all struggling to keep up with customer demand, but I'm trying to stay one step ahead of what customers want. And so you have to be really agile, obviously, in how you approach your marketing communications, but fundamentally, the heart of your brand essence and your brand strategy shouldn't necessarily change. It's just how you communicate to customers. But the essence of your brand is the core of everything that you do.
It sounds obvious to you working at organisations that believe that, but you'd be amazed from my perspective to the number of different organisations that don't behave like that, that chop and change and reinvent it on a regular basis. So it's quite refreshing to hear companies that put it at the heart and stay true to it. I'm interested in whether you can isolate creativity as a metric in what you do. Is there a way that you can isolate that bit that has made the difference? Or is it just what?
I think no.
I'm not sure. I mean, econometric modelling does it to a certain extent. I'm a big believer in using that as a sort of ongoing basis to measure your marketing effectiveness. And that tends to show whether with certain assets have a bigger multiplier effect than others.
Yes.
We use the same thing, so we use econometrics, and actually one thing it has demonstrated is that all of the amplification that we do around our Christmas campaigns, if you think a few years ago we just did an ad, now we do lots of other supporting things to demonstrate how consumer behaviour has changed, and actually you need to be at multiple touch points where they're actually accessing the brand. And actually those amplification plans and activation have been incredibly successful in providing a return on investment, which has been demonstrated by econometrics. So those creative little sprinkles on the top, if you like, have actually been really positive for us.
Right. I don't know if Peter talked about it yesterday, but Peter Field, he increasingly thinks that creativity is best measured, or the best proxy for creativity is fame. And that's the word that he's now increasingly using to determine whether something is creative or not, and it's about fame.
Yeah.
So, is there a metric that you put against fame?
So we have, within Unilever, we have what we call, our 3 principles are, we love an acronym. So it's ART, which is authenticity, relevance, and talkability. Right. So talkability is our equivalent of that. ART didn't work as well.
And can you measure talkability, or is that part of the research industry's challenge? Can they measure?
I think we do measure it. Yeah, I think there's more that we can do to measure it. Certainly, again, over the long term, I think that is the ongoing challenge. Is that so many of our measures, and we've become increasingly addicted to the short-term measures of our industry. Just shares and likes and all of that stuff. They're very exciting, and it's great when you launch a new campaign to see all of that stuff is wonderful. And it's not to say that it's not relevant, but there's lots of evidence to show it doesn't have much correlation to a brand's success over the long term.
Fame, talking famous advertising. How do you put a metric on fame?
Well, I don't think we put a metric on it necessarily. We just talk, it's customer sentiment, isn't it, really? Which is a soft measure, I know, but it's an important one at the same time. So, with that, as I say, a combination of more hard econometrics and sort of customer sentiment is how we'd measure it. Yeah. But we don't actively sort of sit down at the beginning of the year and think, okay, we want to do something that's famous. So I don't think we do.
It's the outcome.
It's the outcome, exactly. So I wouldn't say we go, right, we need to just create brand fame, and that's what we need to do. Yeah. We just want to create something that touches, the nation and is relevant and authentic for the brand at a time of year which is crucially important for us commercially. So it's.
We do think about it quite. We talk quite a lot about fame. We talk a lot about cultural influence, and those two things together. And actually, a lot. Read a lot of Peter's work around. Fame basically has a disproportionate contribution towards effectiveness. Creativity drives fame drives effectiveness. And I suppose it's funny sitting on panels like this as YouTube, because I think people do, and Google, people do expect you to say it's the data, what is new about creativity in a digital world? It's the data, isn't it? Go on Google, it's the data. And actually, through the stuff I've showed, that is built into our everyday. But fame for YouTube, it is a defining capability of the platform, which is, we actually refer to it. Actually, Ian Tate from Wyden's last year in Cannes said, YouTube, it's kind of like a cultural engine, isn't it? It's where ideas are formed and spread. And actually, the benefit if brands can ride that or just understand how to play in that is a big driver of effectiveness. Actually, I feel like I'm the only one wanting to show stuff, but if you just forward on to, there's 10 hours of walking video, which, do people remember that? 10 hours of walking in New York? It's about 18 months old now. It was a video that went up on YouTube, just the one before that. And it was this production company who hired an actress to walk through New York for 10 hours. And she basically recorded the level and amount of harassment.
Doing today? That's not good.
Wow.
What's up, beautiful? Have a good day. Hey, what's up, girl? How you doing? Somebody's acknowledging you. She's in April.
Thanks. Otherwise, I don't, we haven't got forever. But the interesting thing, I think, just about fame and how YouTube kind of plays a role in that is, it's this kind of fame-generating platform. So if you go and search just for 10 hours of walking on YouTube now, it returns almost 100,000 search results, because somebody's taken that format and gone, that's an interesting way of actually exploring lots of different stuff. 10 hours of walking around Comic-Con as a female cosplayer. I have no idea what that means. 10 hours of walking in New York as a woman in a hijab. So that is when we see the platform really contribute towards fame, and actually the brands who can take advantage of that are very successful on the platform as well.
Very interesting. We've got a few minutes left, and I'd really love to hear if you've got some questions for our panellists while we've got them. So I'm going to open it up to the audience. Hopefully a couple of questions.
over there.
Please.
Hi, thanks. Paul Feldwick. I'm interested in, creativity is an odd word. David Ogilvy once pointed out it isn't in the Oxford English Dictionary, which was true when he was writing in the 1980s. It now is, but then so is twerking and a lot of other stuff. And I often think, when we talk about creativity in advertising, what do we actually mean? Obviously, we mean more than one thing. But there's one thing that I think we routinely just don't talk about, although it's so glaringly obvious. And that, for want of a better word, I mean it in the broadest sense. I don't think anybody used this word in this conversation just now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that word is entertainment. And I think that what makes so much advertising really powerful and really work and creates that fame, which is not the whole thing, although it's a very important part of it, is entertainment. You know, when you do a John Lewis ad, you are basically offering people entertainment. And if you think back over all your favourite TV campaigns, you'll probably find that in one sense or another, 10 hours of walking, that for me is what I would include in my definition of entertainment. Yes, it's documentary, it's hard-hitting, but it's the sort of stuff that you would watch if it was on telly or in the cinema or somewhere else. It's something that people want to watch, as you did say. And I think that's a very good definition of it too. Yeah. But I think that we're very oddly in the advertising business shy about using that word entertainment. There may be reasons for that, which I won't go into now. But I think we should be more honest. And any comments on that?
Going to get nods.
I completely agree. I actually had written it as one of my notes, but just forgot. But it was, and that's why I feel so passionately about it. We work in an industry which we should all be really proud of, and it should be attracting the most talented people. And it's increasingly becoming less and less like that, I think, and that's worrying. And I think marketing should be about, and advertising, community, whatever you want, content, whatever you want to call it, should be about entertaining the nation. It should be about ultimately changing people's behaviour, making them think differently, challenging their perceptions on things. All of the traditional things that you learn are still as valid today as they were then, and I still think it's so important. It's not about click-through rates and likes and shares and etc. It's about all of those really powerful things that advertising communications can do.
I think through an agency lens, it's a huge opportunity as well. And I think in my role, working with some of the best and the brightest kind of advertising agencies in town, you see some of them starting to make that pivot a little bit actually, which is how do we provide not just ads for clients? How do we provide genuinely brilliant entertainment for them? And you just need to look at Sing It Kitty, Dancing Pony, and all the Epic Strut. This is entertainment for me. I'd go and seek it out and watch it. So yeah, I very much agree, and I think it's a huge opportunity for the whole industry actually to embrace it a bit more.
Yeah, we've actually just set up a division within Unilever called U Entertainment. So we do believe in the word. But actually your comment did prompt me to think of something else, which is a challenge with the word creativity, which is I think it's got two meanings as well. It's got a meaning of a creative approach to a process which can be applied to any industry, whether that is, accountancy or sports management or media planning or whatever. And then there is the process of creativity as we define it within communication. And I think we get those two things confused sometimes. And I think, and it devalues the skill of, creating something from nothing. Which is the special skill of creatives within agencies. And that creativity actually is often the spark which enables everybody else to be creative. But I think we do devalue it by sort of, that sort of general comment of, oh, everybody can be creative.
I think the subject that you raise of entertainment would be a brilliant one to revisit at some point and say, why aren't we talking about it anymore? Why has it become a dirty word that sounds like we're distracting people from the act of selling, where we never meant it like that? I think it'd be great. Thanks, Paul. Are we out of time, Catherine, or can we ask? Anyone got a burning question they'd like to ask?
One over there has been. That one over there.
Yes, one last question.
Hi, Ben Essen from Iris. I just wanted to ask a question about the tension between evidence and what Rachel, I think you called surprise and delight, and the fact that we know that emotional advertising works best. We also know that this Christmas there'll be more emotional advertising than ever, and therefore it's most likely to work a little bit less well than it used to. How do you know when to follow the evidence trend line and when to do something completely different?
That's a good question. I mean,
And will you be this year?
it's really hard for me to answer without, I'll be killed if I say anything that's remotely related to it.
It was a good attempt to find out what Christmas ad was.
Actually, we need to we did step back this year and think about what we were doing and just and just make sure that that the creative manifestation of our strategy was still really compelling. Was still, and I think we had a bit of we still had a great response. Don't get me wrong, from Man of the Moon last year, but there was a sort of few murmurings around it being sort of a bit sad and a little bit. Did it touch people in slightly the wrong way? And so we've been really thinking about that. So to your point, but that is data based and evidence based, but it's also just intuitively. If you know the brand, you understand it, and you understand how it works, how we connect with our customers, then I think you'll know that. You'll know that about that. Does that answer your question, or what were you asking more about? Sort of data.
I guess it's a sort of macro question.
Yeah.
I also think that there's a misunderstanding as well. When we talk about emotional advertising, we're talking about response to advertising. And you can get, this is something I'm talking about later, you can get a very emotional response through a very rational message. And I think the industry's again's got a bit confused about that. So, and again, it's about, measuring things correctly. I think I certainly think that sort of era of slightly vacuous, wishy-washy emotional advertising, where everybody was trying to do a John Lewis and failing, will probably come to an end. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a really tough question, though, isn't it? Because the answer is probably just a bit before you think you should change. It's really hard to put a thing on that. Great. Thank you all very much for taking part. Thank you, panellists.